Hello, viewers. Welcome back to CVF News, and today we are going to discuss the recent topic that has been sweeping the nation called fantasy football. And on this episode, we're going to be giving you 6 reasons why you should not play fantasy football.
So, starting off at number 1, we have that fantasy football changes the way that you look at the game. And in fantasy football, you draft players from all over the league. And because of this, it causes you to root for the individuals on your own team and to root for their stats instead of watch the game for what it is. So basically, football turns into more of a game of math and inches and yards that players gain instead of the poetry of actually watching the game of football.
Yep.
And another example is that competitive games become to bother people because their star players that they drafted aren't doing well. So say a game is super competitive and it's 0-0 the whole entire game and their player's not scoring any points, it's going to frustrate them.
It also ruins just the team aspect, so not everybody's rooting for their one team. I've been a diehard Packer fan forever, but a lot of those the numbers of those people have been going down because a lot of people are just rooting for the players on their fantasy team instead of rooting for their team to win. Moving on to number 2, it pits you against your own team. So say you have a situation where you got a guy on the Bears, and then they're playing the Packers. My team would be the Packers that I've rooted for forever, and the Bears throw a touchdown to my guy, and I'm super excited even though they just scored on my Packers. So going back on to number 1, it just ruins the team aspect where you're caring too much about your own players. So you're not a fan of a team, you're a fan of players instead. And then it creates conflict because you never really know who you want to win. So you're rooting for the Bears player, but you're also rooting for the Packers to win. So it's just that goes away. It's not you don't care who wins. All you care about is your fantasy players doing well. And fantasy football creates this mantra where you'd rather have your fantasy team win than your own team win. So it's going back again on the rivalries that used to dominate the league, like the Bears, Packers. Instead of the biggest thing that you want to happen is the Packers to win, which is what it was probably 5 years ago. Instead, you want your fantasy players to do well. So, say you have the running back on the Bears, you'd rather have him score 6 touchdowns than to see the Packers win. So it just ruins the watching experience that way.
So moving on to reason number 3 why you should not play fantasy football. And the reason is you will have a lot more free time. By not playing fantasy football, you'll allow yourself not to watch games that you would watch if you were playing fantasy football. For example, say 2 0-6 teams were playing against each other, but you had a fantasy player on one of those teams. You would want to watch the game to see if your player does well or not, when in reality you don't really care about that game because both the teams aren't doing very well this season and it's probably going to be an uninteresting game. And also, by having more free time, you'll probably get a lot more done at work or in school because you won't be checking fantasy as often, giving you more time to finish things. And the last thing is that football will always be there. Your favorite team will play every single week, and you'll always still be able to watch them without the worry of fantasy in the way. So basically, it'll just lighten your load of the games that you have to watch each week, and it'll take a little bit of stress off of your shoulders, knowing that you can just watch your favorite team and see them succeed.
Moving on to number 4. When you play fantasy football, it causes you to be frustrated. And when you're frustrated, you tend to do dumb things. And when you tend to do dumb things, you gamble away all your money on FanDuel. And when you gamble away all your money on FanDuel, your wife divorces you. And when your wife divorces you, you move to Vegas. And when you move to Vegas, you live on a bench. Don't move to Vegas and live on a bench. Stop playing fantasy football.
There it is. Furthermore, we are on to number 5 now, and this is that fantasy football can lead to a lot of stress. And according to Anthony Marcusa in his article titled Top 10 Reasons to Quit Playing Fantasy Football, he states that there's always a chance that you can score the second most points in the league, but then end up losing to the player who scored the most. And this actually does lead to a lot of stress because you feel like you're doing all you can to manage your fantasy football team and you still end up losing. And losing in consecutive weeks is not always the best feeling, and you'll end up feeling like you don't know anything about what you're doing. And this can be extremely stressful at times. And like we mentioned in a previous reason, there's a lot of math involved with fantasy football, and all of this can lead to a lot more stress instead of just watching the game for what it is.
Last but not least, number 6 is that it's completely random. According to Why Real Football Fans Don't Play Fantasy Football by the Federalist, is like you don't control anything in the game. For example, the weather, who gets injured, who gets the ball, the plays the coach calls, and like who gets suspended. When you get when your best player gets hurt or suspended or just isn't getting targeted, it just causes you to get really angry and just causes a lot of anger. This unnecessary anger that wouldn't be there if you want to play fantasy football. It's fantasy football for a reason. There's nothing real about it. It makes you it makes you think angry at the coaches because they're not giving your players the touches they need or targeting them or whatever. So just don't play fantasy football.
So basically, to wrap things up, you should not play fantasy football for a number of reasons that we stated before, because it changes the way that you watch the game. It makes you root against your own home team. It would allow you to have a lot more free time if you didn't play, and it would basically avoid the stress and frustration and all the randomness that goes along with playing fantasy football. So to conclude, I guess we could both say, as interviewers and past fantasy players, we both would not recommend playing fantasy football, and you should not play.
I'll never play another week of fantasy football as long as I live.
We're out.